There is a Sufi story about a man who is so good that the angels tell God to give him the gift of miracles. God wisely tells them to ask him if that is what he would wish. So the angels visit this very good man and offer him first the gift of healing by hands, then the gift of conversion of souls, and lastly, the gift of virtue. He refuses them all. They insist he choose a gift or they will choose one for him. Very well, he replies. I ask that I may do a great deal of good without ever knowing it. The story ends this way. The angels were perplexed. They took counsel and resolved upon the following plan. Every time the saint's shadow fell behind him, it would have the power to cure disease, soothe pain, and comfort sorrow. As he walked, behind him his shadow made arid paths green, caused withered plants to bloom, gave clear water to dried up brooks, fresh color to ill children, and joy to unhappy people. The saint simply went about his daily life, diffusing virtue as the stars diffuse light and the flowers scent, without ever being aware of it. The people respected his humility and followed him silently, never speaking to him about his miracles. Soon they even forgot his name and called him the Holy Shadow. You can get a lot of good done in this world if you don't care who gets the credit. For some of us, to imagine ourselves living like a saint right now is just too much when we feel lucky just to have survived another day sometimes. When the financial, childcare, and health struggles take up all of our energy, so there is none left to diffuse virtue out into the world. I heard a new term this summer that really encapsulates what many of us find ourselves doing in the ungodly hours between midnight and 6 a.m. Caught in the urgent hummingbird heartbeat of a 2 a.m. or 5 a.m., thoughts racing, many of us decide to throw in the towel on any chance of peaceful dreaming. So we pick up our phone or other device and commence an activity some writers are calling doom scrolling, a morbid tumble into a deep hole of COVID-19 death tallies, horrific racial injustices, despicable Trump tweets, tropical storms gathering, and any other news that will serve to spike your blood pressure and ensure a night falling into a wakeful anxiety spiral. Sound familiar to anyone? Oh, okay, I see some hands out there. The danger of doom scrolling is that you start to believe the despair narrative is the main narrative of the human story. When I preach to you about hope in the dark, I'm not talking about a naive assumption of the power of human progress. I don't speak of hope, the hope of eternal progress, which is often predicated on exploitation anyway. No, this hope I speak of is a deep truth of our existence. It is ancient, this hope. Your life was written by your ancestors who survived some desolate reality, some treacherous journey, some swindling or enslavement or war, so that you would survive today. The truth is this. It would require some collective amnesia to lose the narrative of human capacity for calm amidst chaos, resilience amidst destruction, and healing amidst widespread pain and disease. We, people of faith and reason, know there is a difference between healing and curing. This is why I wanted us to journey back to a moment in our collective history when our religious commitment to science and reason saved lives. In 1918, when others sought a cure or a demonic justification for the flu pandemic, Unitarians and Universalists focused not on a cure, but on healing. Worldwide, over 50 million people died that year, or that 18-month span. The first flu showed up in the United States in March of 1918, similar to March in 2020, showed up at a military base in Kansas. And by that fall, most American communities were inundated with cases, and hospitals struggled to keep up, especially as many of doctors and nurses were dispatched to wartime service overseas. The need to restrict public gatherings was not immediately understood. Face masks were eventually encouraged. Church gatherings were shut down in some places, but not all. Unitarians and Universalists cooperated with the authorities, with the church shutdowns. They followed the science. Reverend Charles Graves at the UU Church in Hartford, Connecticut, said this that year: 2 to 3 generations ago, it would have been regarded as the work of the devil if anyone had attempted to suspend church. Now, when an epidemic smites, church services and prayer meetings are all suspended, and we readily agree to this because we know now that fighting and conquering disease is not God's business, but ours. Many Unitarian churches, like the one in Provincetown, Massachusetts, and Santa Cruz, California, as we heard, transformed into field hospitals, while the Unitarian Church in Iowa City served meals to medical students and hospital workers. The UU Church in Oakland removed seats and installed beds, as we saw in the video, to accommodate a new clinic. The UU Church in Rochester became a convalescent hospital after people were released from the medical hospital. Congregations provided space, but also took on the heroic work of reducing the spread of disease and treating patients. And in Worcester, Mass., women teamed up with other area churches to care for the newly orphaned children of the pandemic, providing shelter, food, homeschool, and even tucking the children into bed. In Lowell, Massachusetts, the Universalist Church became a soup kitchen, providing nightly meals to anyone who entered. By the end of 1919, normal activities such as church services resumed. In March 2020, we at UUCA were among the very first houses of worship in this country to take our worship service online on March 16th. We acted early and swiftly, and I wonder sometimes if our decisive action saved some lives in our own community. Americans are very good at the mingled complacency and the despair that says that things cannot change, will not change, and that we do not have the power to change them. But if we look at our history, even our history more recent than the last flu epidemic, the writer Rebecca Solnit reminds us just several years ago when 2,600 people lost their lives in Manhattan. The Al-Qaeda attack on the Twin Towers did not defeat New Yorkers that day. It destroyed the buildings, contaminated the region, disrupted the global economy, but it most assuredly did not conquer the citizenry. Let's remember what actually happened on that morning. Many were afraid when the planes became missiles and the towers became torches, then shards of dust. But few, if any, actually panicked. Hundreds of thousands of people rescued each other and themselves, evacuating the buildings in the area, and they helped in the first minutes and hours by those around them. Both Public School 150 and elementary school and the High School for Leadership and Public Service were successfully evacuated without casualties. In many cases, teachers took students home with them that morning on 9/11. And I found this especially fascinating. A spontaneously assembled flotilla of boats, ranging from a yacht to a historic fireboat, evacuated nearly 500,000 people from lower Manhattan in a matter of hours. A nautical feat on the scale of the British evacuation of an army from Dunkirk in the early days of the Second World War. This fleet rescued in just a few hours as many people as the British fleet rescued in days. Admittedly, they were under German fire, but then New York's ferry operators and pleasure boat captains were steering into that toxic cloud on a day when many thought more violence was still to come. Adam Mayblew, who walked down from the 87th floor of the North Tower with some of his co-workers, wrote on the internet immediately afterward, "They failed in terrorizing us. We were calm." Hollywood movies and too many government pandemic plans still presume most of us are cowards or brutes, that we panic, that we trample each other, rampage, or freeze helpless in moments of crisis and chaos. Most of us still believe this, though it is untrue if you look at the history. Hollywood likes this view because it paves the way for movies starring some Superman in the foreground and hordes of stampeding, screaming extras. Without helpless people to save, heroes become unnecessary, or rather, without them, it turns out we are all heroes. I wear a face mask every day made for me by the mask makers of the UU congregation of Atlanta. I wear this stole Joyce Lanterman handcrafted out of the scraps of masks she made for essential workers at Emory Hospital with fabric that had been donated to her by Jill Pohl and LaFoon, UUCA members. I think about those Unitarians and those Universalists 100 years ago, no longer able to gather in their sanctuaries, quarantined at home, just like us, yet not like us at all without the internet. They didn't have the technology to do the thing we are doing right this second. And so they calmly went to work. They didn't find a cure for the flu, but they pitched in to heal their communities and the wider community. They understood that fighting and conquering disease was not God's business, but ours. We, Unitarians and Universalists, we are part of a narrative that casts a long, holy shadow. We understand that though we may not yet have the cure or the vaccine, we can be a force of healing in the community today. You are doing it. You are walking as that saint walked in the story. You are organizing. You are joining UU the vote. You are staying home. You are staying masked. You are sending cards and making calls to people in need. You're making masks for hospital workers. You're bringing meals to a neighbor. Simply by insisting that you keep faith in science along with faith in our ability to survive, you are doing the work of a saint. Though you may not see all the good you do, you cast the holy shadow.